Hi, I'm Leon Goren, president of PEO Leadership, a peer-to-peer leadership advisory firm. We're an amazing community of CEOs, presidents, and senior executives. Ask yourself, are you learning as fast as the world is changing? It's time for Ontario business leaders to band together for counsel and support. It's time for you to tap into the business wisdom of our peer groups and unlock new ways to grow. I want you to come out of this COVID crisis a better leader and your organization ready for what's next. Take the first step at PEO-leadership.com. So this morning, I'm very excited to be joined by a good friend and PEO member, Dr. Pawliw-Fry, world-renowned leadership expert, New York Times bestselling author. For those that don't know the book, Performing Under Pressure, co-founder and president of IHHP, which stands for the Institute of Health and Human Potential, which, by the way, is a Fast 100 company. JP speaks all over the world about leadership and emotional intelligence, and in 2019, he released an updated version of his book, How to Perform Under Pressure, The Science of Doing Your Best When It Matters Most. So I can't think of anyone I'd want to share the stage with today who could talk to us about how this crisis really separates the great leaders from the rest of the pack. Good morning, JP. Thanks for joining me.
Pleasure's mine, Leon, and nice to see some friendly faces that I know from the PEO conference. I do like that haircut, Tim, looking pretty sleek. And good to see everyone. Excited to get in conversation with you, Leon.
Oh, that's great. So what we're going to do, just for everybody, some of the logistics here, we're going to go back and forth. JP is really the science here behind all this stuff. Myself, I look at it more around my experience of dealing with a lot of the leaders over the last 15 to 20 years and sort of extracting what I've seen. But when it comes to big science and empirical data and really understanding a lot of this stuff, JP becomes a go-to person. And on that, so what JP and I are going to do here is for about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, we're going to go back and forth. We're going to talk and try and answer some of those questions that we put out in our marketing material. And then we're going to open up to questions, any questions that you can direct either to JP or myself. So let's open it up, and I'm going to go right to the science, JP. So I was thinking we'd open it around, maybe you can describe what happens to an individual, because a leader or any individual really, when something hits us, like be it a crisis, be it a traumatic event, trauma, how does your brain start to engage?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's a really important question because what we know is that the way the brain is designed, we feel before we think. Joseph Ledoux at New York University found this about 15, 20 years ago. And this was a seminal finding because what it means is that as any of us walk into any day with high pressure situations in front of a whale client, having to make a big decision, or with some of the athletes I work with, walking into an Olympic Games or a Super Bowl or an NBA championship. In all of those circumstances, it's really important we understand how the brain works, which is that emotions come before thought. We feel before we think. If you understand that, then you're going to bring in different strategies versus just trying to outthink or outwork. And so that's actually the first part, because if we can't manage that emotional part of our brain, the limbic system, and many of us know the idea of the amygdala. That's kind of a almond-shaped structure really at the base part of our brain. So it's the amygdala that's sitting there and it's trying to protect us. So remember this, the brain is there to help us actually survive, protect the body. And it's very body related, which is kind of an interesting point, but it's there to protect the body, help the body survive. And so it's looking for, it's got its antennae out and it's looking for anything that can harm us or harm our business. And if we feel like, and we all have a default appraisal in how we look at things, which maybe we'll get into a bit later. But if our default appraisal is to say, oh my gosh, that's bad, that's a crisis, there's a whole chemical cascade that goes on in our brain that puts the amygdala in the driver's seat. So think of it this way, your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex, that cognitive part of your brain, they're jockeying for position. They're trying to see who's going to get the driver's seat to make all the decisions. And if your amygdala is in the driver's seat, you're not going to make great decisions. You're going to infect others with your emotions. And this is not a recipe for success.
So JP, in knowing that, and I'm trying to think about the first 30 days of this crisis and put it in that perspective. Was there preparation that leaders could have done? And I got my own thinking around what they could have done, but in your own mind, in terms of that would allow them to control the emotions and to really think rationally and logically about what to do next.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot here. Let me say this. Here's what I saw. And we survey about 40,000 people a month. So we have a pretty decent data set, and we've done that for many years. I would see a lot of leaders go into hyper work mode, up at whatever time and just driving, working late. And what most leaders miss is that they're actually paid for a very few big decisions. And by setting the tone in the organization, if they set the tone with this frenzy, frenetic, work late, and not be at their best for those really few decisions. So it's almost like they work themselves to a frenzy. Now when they have to make those few big decisions, they're not at their best, number one. But number two, they're setting a tone in the organization like, oh my gosh, this is a crisis. You should panic. And we might say, oh, everything's fine. But people are listening to us. They're watching us. And so in that first 30 days, Leon, and I think for all of us, and by the way, our business was severely affected as well. The key is that we have to look after ourselves. We have to make sure that we're in a good place so we can set the tone, infect people and emotions in an effective way. So let me just give you a little data on that. Harvard Medical and Business School did a joint study, put 3 people into a room. The person most emotionally excitable, whether negatively or positively, infected the other 2 people within 30 seconds, whether they say a word or not. So we're infecting people all the time, especially when we're in a senior position. So we have to be really thoughtful, because as soon as we create panic in the organization, everyone else is going to model our behavior, going to work far too many hours and really wasted hours. They're not going to restore. And now when they have to make important decisions at their level, they're not going to be as effective. So we have to stop and say, okay, it's not about working crazy hours. It's about being very thoughtful about how we manage ourselves, how we manage our brain. So that would be the first part. The second part is we have to grow skills around how to manage these strong emotions. This is a scary time. I mean, let's really look at this. We have this, pandemic that we don't really know what's going on. I mean, we can all talk about it to the extent that we all have information, but it's changing. It's morphing. Even Germany today is worried now about a second wave, and Germany's done really well. Canada's done extraordinarily well, but we still have to be on our guard. But I don't want to get into that too much. But number one, we have this pandemic where there's a lot of uncertainty. We have this economy, again, a lot of uncertainty. It started to look good for a while. Now there's a real question. We have racial injustice, systemic racial injustice that I think people are finally waking up to. And then we have this huge uncertainty around politics in the US. So we have 4 major kind of influences on what's going on. It's absolutely reasonable if you, listening right now, feel a bit overwhelmed, feel a bit panicky. Absolutely makes sense. You're not alone. Again, our data and our practice tells us that's absolutely the case. But it doesn't mean you can't do something to manage your emotions so you can show up more consistently at your best.
No, that's great, JP. Let me, and you can critique me on this, because so when I step back and think about it from a leadership perspective, and I think about the preparation in terms of distinguishing between those that sort of were able to really take those 30 days and to clearly articulate the vision, make decisions quick. They were almost very agile. And there were 2 things that struck me. Number one was their leaders, they typically think big about their business.
Yep.
So that's number one. And I would say most good leaders do that. They constantly think about their business and drive it forward. By the way, the second thing that I always think about leadership is not only just forecasting what the future looks like, so you're thinking big, but the second piece is always around how I engage and inspire my team. That's right. You really have 2 priorities.
Sure.
The second big thing that I thought in terms of preparation that I noticed is different. They actually think and engage well beyond their business. So you just mentioned all these uncertainties that we got hit by the crisis, right? We had medical stuff, we got business potentially sinking, closures everywhere. I've got family challenges. I don't know where my income's coming. You got inundated with all these different things. I found a lot of these great leaders, actually, what they have done, the ones that have prepared for it, actually spent a lot of time out of their business. So they were looking at big macro events, right? They had the ability to sort of sit there, digest information, funny enough, be great complex problem solvers, number one. And number two, actually were pretty good critical thinkers because they were taking all that. It was almost like practice.
Yep.
And so they took that stuff and it enabled them to actually digest and think about what was happening around them and try and develop a path forward. And so, I mean, those are one of the biggest things that stand out in my mind. And in our world at PEO, for example, we actually deal with those two, right? You get into a group, you're in one of my groups, we sit around the table, we're posed with different challenges from different people, different industries, and we're constantly put on the spot in terms of trying to problem solve and think through this stuff.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like, do you see
it does.
Too?
It doesn't. And let me pick up on that a little bit, Leon, because I think you're hitting a really important point. Kind of, how does this kind of manifest on the ground? Almost what I talked about around the science. And here's how it manifests. When we are feeling under threat, we get very small. We get really tunnel vision and we lose the perspective. And what you're talking about is some of these leaders are able to operate at a higher level and keep a bigger perspective. And you're absolutely correct. And part of that is, some of their rituals. We'll talk about some of the habits that we've studied amongst high performers or even amongst our Olympic athletes or NFL or NBA teams we work with that allow them to kind of keep that bigger perspective. Because as soon as we lose that bigger perspective, we're in trouble. We really are. We're going to make decisions that aren't taking in as much of the information as is possible. By the way, that's why it's so important to have a really strong 2IC, a second in command, who can sit there and say, Leon, that's BS. What are you talking about? Okay, we need to stop for a minute, Leon, and just really think about the business and get out of this panic. Like, we need people who can speak truth to us when we're starting to get down that what we call reaction pathway, right? So we have a choice. We can react or we can respond. If we're not managing our brain, we're going to react. If we can keep the bigger perspective because we've managed our brain and there's some other habits, then we can have that kind of bigger picture. And I actually love the way you describe that because that's a really big part of what we've noticed amongst the leaders who we studied. And I think, we like to challenge leaders to be aggressive learners. In our data, we found that high performers, whether leaders or non-leaders, are imperfect. Everyone on this call is imperfect. Every one of us has made mistakes in the last 3 or 4 months. And by the way, I have to say this, Leon. Well, I'll come back to it. I want to talk 30 days in a minute. I want to come back to that. Okay. All of us have made big mistakes. I have. Leon has. We all have. Yeah. So high performers, if you look at a normal distribution of a population, those on the tail, the top 10% on that tail, they're imperfect, but they extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn. Let me say that again because it's my favorite stat of all of our data. High performers are imperfect, but they extract more. They extract 3 to 5 times more information from the same opportunity to learn. Our job is actually to be really aggressive learners. Keep that perspective that Leon's talking about. Learn as fast as the world is changing so that we can sit there and think, okay, make that calculus of that thinking big and making a big decision and setting the tone. And I fear that not enough are prepared to do this. And you know this from the book, Leon, but one of the big ideas that came out of the Performing Under Pressure book was that most individuals, sport or non-sport, underperform in the most high pressure moments. And we talk about, there was a couple of great examples. Given the age of everyone, I don't know if that's a put down or not, but I'm just thinking about the demographics of everyone on this call. We all know who Mr. October was, right? Reggie Jackson. Why was he called Mr. October? Because he hit so many home runs in October under pressure. But it's BS. It's a total myth. His best October was only equal to his 5th best season. It's a complete myth. Michael Jordan shot worse under pressure shooting foul shots the end of the game, up, point, down, a point, or tied, compared to a season or his playoff average, consistent with every NBA player in the history of the game. We do not do better under pressure. It's a complete myth, right? That's really important that everyone knows it. You will make mistakes. So because of this, we have to make sure that we have really strong teams around us who feel psychologically safe to say, JP, what the heck are you talking about? Give your head a shake, or let's step back and really think about this. But it's someone there to challenge us. And so we need skills, and then we need a team around us who can really challenge us, because we don't rise to the occasion. We fall to our level of preparation or our level of training. This is your point, Leon. Some leaders are more prepared. This is why, if you're not a PEO member and you're listening, and this may seem like I'm pitching for Leon, join PEO, join a different group that's like PEO. I don't really care what you join, but join a group where you can sit there and have 12 members like I had in our last meeting, grill you and say, what about that, JP? How about your numbers, right? I've got some strengths around human behavior, not as much running a business, right? I never really wanted to be president of my business. It sounds funny. It's an interesting story, but I am. And so I have these 12 people who are sitting there asking me questions. They don't care if I get upset with the questions. We've got this great group where people feel psychologically safe. Whether it's PEO or somewhere else, I don't really care. But if you have that board of advisors, it makes a huge difference. So I've kind of gone a little off, Leon, but I liked your point about preparation and perspective. Those are really important if we're going to be successful during a time of pressure.
Yeah, and just to add to you, I think the other element is the preparation gives you confidence. And if you look at these leaders, and that, it was really about making quick decisions and being agile. And you need confidence, especially when you don't really know what the hell's going to happen down the road, right? There's so many things popping up. So, and we all know, and inherently, we actually all know that the more we prepare, the better we are, and we feel more confident in terms of making decisions or speaking in front of people, whatever it is, right? So yeah. I come back to that. Another area I wanted to touch on, JP, was risk and tolerance for risk, right? So here's the other side. I mean, we talk about building confidence, we talk about capabilities, but what I'm trying to understand is risk an inherent behavioral trait? Because if you think about, I sometimes think about that when somebody asks me and they're looking for a new president or CEO in their business and they're entrepreneurial, one of the things I always think about is what's the risk tolerance of that individual as a leader? And are they willing to make the tough decisions? Are they willing to stand up and do that? And I think under a crisis, we saw that more than ever. Like that's where the gaps really started to show between individuals who said, I'm going to take the risk and I fall on my sword if it doesn't work, or I'll switch directions. But if you don't take any risks, you go nowhere. And in a crisis, it's down. So what's your thinking on that? Like is it innate or is it something we can work on?
Yeah. So, first of all, I like the way you're thinking about it, because as leaders in our organizations, we need to think about who do we have in key positions and how much risk taking do we need to take? Great idea. Here's what we know about risk. We all have, we talk about nurture and nature around any behavioral trait, any personality trait. Well, especially personality light. I don't want to get into the big five of personality, but here's the thing. Around risk, every one of us has a range, okay? So, Leon, your range might be kind of, this much, and my range might be this much. So that's kind of part of it. So we all have a range, right? Could be for optimism, could be for risk tolerance. So that's part of what we're kind of born with. But we then have intentional activity that can grow that range. So for you, Leon, you might be lower than me in your range, but you've maximized it because you work at it. You think, hey, how can I grow this? How can I learn from others? How can I be an aggressive learner? And you're at the top of your range. I might have a higher range, but for whatever reason, I was lazy. I just didn't realize I could grow it. And I never grew my risk tolerance, let's say, or optimism or empathy or whatever it is. And so I only grew it this much. So you actually might have more than me, even though your range is lower than me, if that makes sense. And I do think, now, that aside, I'll say this. I think right now is a huge opportunity for everyone who's running a business, because the foundations are moving around so much that there's great opportunity if we're bold, if we're willing to take risk, to find opportunities and kind of grow our market share, grow our position in the market or in our clients' minds. And so I think that when we get to normal, and we will, let's not kid ourselves, like things aren't really significantly going to change, in my opinion. We went through 9/11, we went through the global financial crisis, et cetera, right? And I feel like this is going to be a bit of a brag, but during that global financial crisis, we were advising, Federal Reserve Board, bank rather, in the US, Goldman Sachs, lots of hedge funds, all these different folks. And we heard, oh my God, it'll be a new normal. It'll never be the same. It was identical a year or two later, right? It's identical a year or two after 9/11. It's going to be identical with some slight changes around where we're working, which is great. But essentially, it's going to be the same. We're all going to fly. We're all going to run our businesses. And if that's true, and look, everyone can disagree. Maybe in our question period, someone will disagree, and that's great. But between now and that time, between now and the day after, when we get to whatever the normal is, could be a year, could be 6 months, but 6 months plus a day or a year plus a day, if we've been bold and thoughtful, because we also have to protect our businesses, but if we can be bold, when that day comes, we'll be in a different position than we are right now. And I think that's the opportunity. And that's what I think all of us, and I actually like the way you said it, Leon, many of us who are on this call think big. And that's a fantastic thing. And so we would be thoughtful about that. But I would say, yeah, be bold, be courageous, find opportunity. And that's not just like externally, it could be internally, right? I know even in our PEO group, some folks are like, oh, should people work at home? And I think at times there's a bit of distrust that they're actually working. Oh my gosh, like this is the best opportunity for you to show that you trust your people, that you get more into a results-driven kind of approach to your management versus how many hours are you spending. Why would we ever reinforce and reward how many hours people are working? We don't do that with our clients. No, we talk about a great product and delivering it. So they deliver a great product and they deliver it. And if we can show them that we trust them, and we're not like, we had somebody, I don't think it was our PEO group, it was a different group so I work with, as you know, Leon, CEO and senior teams. Yep. Somebody say, well, can we put a little camera? Can we take over their camera and see what they're doing all day? This is like a 125,000 person organization. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Even that you're having that thought just shows how bad your leadership is. And so I want to say to everyone, now is an opportunity to kind of reorient your cultures that say, we trust you. And, we're going to create a different way of managing, which is more results driven than, activity driven. And look, then we can talk about the relative merits of how to do that. But to me, it's like, this is a big opportunity and it does take risk.
Yeah, no, that's great, JP. We're going to jump into the emotional intelligence, but before I do, on the capability side, the last thing I just want to emphasize the group, and we're not going to spend any time, so we don't have, is the whole financial intelligence piece. So
right.
JP you talked about being able to lean on a great team that you've hired, and you're going to have the financial CFO. What I did notice in the crisis was, even the leader, you still need to have a basic understanding of financial statements and understand the difference between a financial statement and a cash flow statement. Because what became really important in the early days was cash flow, not about how you recognize revenue and when the expenses come. And so whether you're running a multinational organization or whether you're running an entrepreneurial piece, I urge you all to think basic 101, trying to make sure that you totally understand the number side. And what needs,
let me speak to that, Leon, only because I am exactly who you're talking to right now. And you know this, right? You know our business. I'm an ideas guy. I'm a culture guy. I love our company and I'm really proud of our company. I'm not a numbers guy. And it's not that I don't do well at numbers. I just don't care. But the truth is I need to care, and I need to, there's some things that are effortless for us. So all of us are listening right now, I want you to ask yourself, this is good self-awareness. There's some things that just are effortless for you. Like for me, I love getting on communicating ideas. I could do this all day. There's not a lot of effort for me right now in what I'm doing. It's effortful for me to think about, okay, let's look at the numbers. Let's understand, cash flow versus, our business, our P&L, and kind of dig into it and grind into it. Part of it, I've got a bit of ADD, so it's just hard for me, but I have to do that. And Leon, I think you've been great with me to say, JP, you got to understand these differences or whatever it is. And I think over the last 20 years, I've hopefully grown a bit in my, understanding and my application of it. But just know that there's going to be some stuff that all of us don't want to do, but we have to do it. And the financial intelligence one is one where, you're speaking to me probably more than anyone else on this call, Leon.
Well, I'm not. I'm talking to everybody. And I'm glad you're feeling discomfort with the financial intelligence piece, because I always feel discomfort when I'm having to talk and interview you. So there you go.
There you go. Excellent.
It was funny. We'll get onto the EI side. There's two areas. I know we're running tight. EI is a really important piece here. And there was a recent article just released in Inc. where the CEO of Siemens, he just spoke recently. He wrote, I'll read you what he said. The basis for this forward-looking working model is further development of our corporate culture. These changes, so they've gone to part-time working, okay? 2 to 3 days flexible. These changes will also be associated with a different leadership style, one that focuses on outcomes rather than on time spent at the office. We trust our employees and empower them to spare their work themselves, to shape their work themselves so that they can achieve the best possible results. Talk about a bold move. Before this crisis, if you ask many of our leaders, would be like, work at home? Yeah, maybe one day a week. But rarely would you see someone talk about productivity and outcomes versus visual time in the office.
Absolutely. I think this is almost kind of back to our earlier point, Leon. This is why we have to build a high trust culture. You actually can't do that unless you build a high trust culture, but it comes from the leader. So everyone who's listening right now, it's up to you. Like, what are you modeling? What are the questions that you're asking? Like, if you're asking, like, what are you doing with every hour of your day, which I don't imagine most are, but if you're even thinking about that and getting into that, you've lost the plot. And I think that, for that Siemens, and by the way, if you know their business, I mean, they are a really buttoned down German driven business. We've done some work actually in Germany with them, and they are, they're the last company in a sense who would put out something like that, but power to them. I think that's a great message, a great example of what each of us can do, because here's the thing, if you're working at Siemens today, you're feeling tall and proud. You're like, yeah, that's us. And I'm going to live into that. Look, there will be 2 or 3 or 4% of everyone, everyone in your workforce who, yeah, maybe you can't trust as much, or yeah, maybe they're whatever. Like in any normal population, you're going to get that. But that's not what you manage to. You manage to, everyone else, the 96, 97% who want to feel pride, who get really inspired by that message and are going to like work their butt off. I mean, look, by the way, again, from the data we have, people are working way more right now. There's actually not a worry of people aren't working enough. In fact, there's a worry that people aren't working enough, right? I mean, there's some organizations, Netflix comes to mind, where they're just like, you can do as much vacation as you want because it's a results-driven culture. And as soon as people hear that, they actually don't take enough time off. So it's interesting. So again, I want to challenge, every leader right now, because you can create, what's neat is that there's some companies we work with. I think of United Health Group, 300,000 people. They're Fortune 6 company, and IBM's 300 or 400,000, whatever the numbers are, of number of employees. Most of the people listening, and to you and I today, Leon, we're not 100,000 employees. We can change our culture, but it comes from us, right? So that's actually great news, and I hope we use this crisis to really think about our culture, not just about, get things done and survive. Yes, we have to do that, but we can also change our culture to create the kind of environment where people will give extra effort, discretionary effort, and they will trust and do all those things that you want them to do.
It's funny, I pick up, I jotted down a bunch of words here as I thought about those leaders have been very, very successful over the last 5 months. And we already talked about direction, belief, and understanding where they're going. That was their capabilities, their ability to take risks. But on the emotional side, empathy, patience, encouragement, role modeling, like 4 key elements in terms of what these great leaders were doing during this crisis. So not only do they have to deal with the stress, so they got all the stress and all the unknown, they actually need to be patient enough to guide all their people. And understanding those people, just like that individual has anxiety, they got challenges at home, and to help them move. And in many cases, we furloughed employees, right? We had to push them out with a promise to bring them back. We didn't know what the future was. Although, I mentioned those 4 things. You train people around a lot of that stuff on the emotional side. Well, I know it's a process. I'm going to say, how do you do it? But it is a long process. How successful are you guys at doing it? And typically, how long does it? I want to teach somebody empathy. I want to teach somebody patience. Is it possible? They're 45, 50 years old today. How long is it going to be to teach that leader to do that?
Gosh, I mean, do we have a couple of hours? So I'll say this. We don't work with an Olympic athlete for a week, right? We work with them over years. It takes years. This is, I challenge everyone today. What is the learning that you're doing, independent of working with a company like us? What's the learning that you're really committed to? And so when we think of, the importance of self-awareness, where are the areas that you're not as strong in? Financial kind of detail, that's not my thing. So I need a lot of help from the people in my organization around that. But what is it for everyone here? Maybe it is empathy that you're not as strong at. So, what do you do? Well, first of all, you have to get data. So we have a 360 instrument, and I assume most people know what a 360 instrument is on the call, but if not, it's, we'll ask, Leon, if we're assessing him, 48 questions, including on empathy and emotional intelligence and leadership. But then we'll ask him to ask up to 15 others all around him, person he reports to, people, colleagues on the same level, direct reports, key clients. We even have family and friends in our tool. And we've put like 250,000 people through this tool or something like that now. But we want to get Leon to sit there and go, okay, here's my intention of how I show up. And then we get all of the data from everyone else. And here's the impact of how you show up. And we look at the two. So it first has to start with data. So if you're thinking about growing your emotional intelligence, start with data, number 1. Number 2, it's got to be a process that takes time, that where you practice, right? So, we have our learning online, virtual learning. We've been doing it for many years online. This has been a boon for us in some ways that we can't train in person because we're having a lot of trouble getting clients to move from in-person to virtual. Still, it's not easy. Everyone's in a bit of a state of panic, but it's kind of helping our business in a sense. But you want to engage in learning with a group. You want to get a coach, and then you want to do some learning every day. So it's got to be a long process. It does. It just, because the biggest thing is we're changing neural pathways, right? So when any of us are faced with a crisis, let's say before we learn anything, and let's take empathy. Many of us, when we are under pressure, we get very self-referential. Empathy is not something that people are, empathy is an interesting one because it's as much because we're not managing ourselves more than we're not able to listen to others, or we don't want to listen is a better way of saying it. So if you want to grow empathy, you got to build self-awareness first. You got to build emotional management to manage your brain. You got to change your neural pathways over this time so that now when I'm under pressure, I don't get self-referential. I sit there and go, I wonder what's going on for Leon. I wonder what's going on for my senior team. And this is a really important part. I actually, this wasn't maybe where we're intending to go, but I'll say this. For everyone listening, you got to work on your ego, as do I, right? We get so focused on us that's when empathy goes out the window, right? The best leaders are those who can feel all the things we're all talking about, step beside themselves and all their worries and tune into others. All of us have been with those leaders. And I do a lot of work with US Army and Navy and, US Marines and stuff. The best leaders, it's so obvious. It's so not about them. That's why it's internal work. I'm still working on this. I don't say this as if I'm like some great leader who's, selfless. No, I'm fighting the same fight you are. And to the degree that our people can see that it's not about us, why can't we stand Donald Trump? Let's be really clear, because it's all about him. And he's an extreme, right? He's an outlier. But I'll say to everyone listening, if you can kind of step beside yourself, have your 2IC or others call you on it, you're going to get people going through a wall for you, Let me tell you, because we've seen it, right? So that's a big one that I would say as well, Leon.
No, that's great, JP. And the fact that you're talking about it is a long process, but you can start almost at any time and grow with it is important. Because when we look at the crisis today, we're far from being over. And so, we talked about the past and saying, okay, we've noticed these great leaders step up, really start to pivot, drive their organization, and sort of leave the rest of the pack behind. But I still think there's an opportunity for everyone in this room to still shift their game. And so some of it is, yes, push the growing, it's internal work. Because the next 6 months, I said 90 to 120 days, but really we're probably in the 4th or 5th inning here in this crisis.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
We think about this summer and the upcoming fall. And I believe the upcoming fall, we've had experts on the live web forecast forward in terms of the financial side, different topics. And everyone seems to be talking about what will this fall look like and the stress. And so for people in the room, preparation. This is the Olympics. We're preparing for a big game. We still have months to go. We're heavy into the training. We want to stay energized. We want to stay sharp, JP. How do we do it?
Yeah. Okay. So habit. Really look at your habits. So, I could tell you a bunch of things that are all around learning and training, assessment, training, coaching. That's there. But you want to look at your habits. I'll start with one. Do not wake up and look at your phone first thing. Do not do that. What does that do? We wake up and we look at our news feed. We look at, text or emails. It spikes our cortisol. Now, cortisol, a stress hormone, is highest in the morning, right? It's actually get us up and going. But if we spend the first 15, 20 minutes or longer looking at our phone, getting worked up about something at work, an email that came in from overseas or a client or whatever it is, or what's going on in Washington, we spike our cortisol. That's one of the main reasons why we burn out. Many of us have felt burnout, right? What's interesting is I think we were all pretty good in the first little while. Like we're all like we had lots of adrenaline. We're like working hard, but at some point that wears out. And if we don't manage our brain, we wear out. Okay, so don't get up and look at your darn phone. I'll give you something that is around habits. Figure out a really good morning routine that works for you. And I don't care what it is. And in fact, in our studies of high performers, there's such a wide variety of morning routines, but there is a morning routine. There is an intention of how you start the day, right? So, whatever works for you, but experiment. Because I can tell you what we know is that if you start the morning off right, and by the way, for me, it's actually the night before. I'm not good at sleeping. I'm a good sleeper, but I stay up too late, and then I get up too early. So for me, I need to get a really good 7 or 8 hours of sleep. But if I can do that, and if I can wake up, not look at my phone, and do my morning routine, which I'll describe in a minute if it's helpful for people, that sets me up for the day. I get a bit of momentum. I get a bit of focus. And all of a sudden, I come to the end of the day and I'm still kind of not fresh maybe, but I'm not as burnt out as I can normally be. So I would say that's a really important habit right there is to think about how do you start your day.
That's great. Thank you, JP. I'd love to open it up to questions. You and I could keep going. We pushed it further, and I knew that would happen. Any questions really in the group, please post in the group chat. I'll ask you to come off. There's not, we got a good audience here, and you can pose a question either to JP or myself. Anything on leadership here that you may have here that can maybe help you. And as you're doing that, as people are thinking of questions, the other thing we didn't touch on, and I'm a big believer, obviously, in PEO because it's all, to me, and I think Rosabeth Cantor talked about it. She talked about capabilities, connections, and cash. But she talked about being outside the building, already past your career and stuff. But in your career, I would argue, and it would have helped in this crisis because I've watched people in terms of how they've reacted, who they leaned on, connections.
Yes.
And the development of connections outside of your own business. I talked about the macro perspective, gaining insights around that. But when I think about these great leaders and who they surround themselves with and the effort they make to build connections, so in times of crisis or opportunities that they are prepared with potential partnerships, wherever it may go, is so important. And I really saw that again, even within our own community, right? We went to weekly meetings where the connections and the lean-ins became so important around that. In your business, probably the same thing, JP, in terms of the connections and who you connect with.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I think we do is we get into this mindset, okay, I just got to work harder and harder and harder. And we forget, or we don't realize how powerful our connections, our relationships are. And I'm going to say this to more of the men in the room, because when we're under pressure, when we're under stress, women as a default behavior will, we call it tend and befriend. They will reach out and befriend, and they'll tend to others. And that's one of the reasons we think actually that women live longer than men, is because they are more emotionally connected. Whereas men, what do? We do the opposite. We isolate. We're afraid of how we're going to come across. We get so involved in impression management. I hope I don't sound so negative today on some leaders and on men, let's say, but it's just a habit we have to be really careful about. So one of the things that is great, and you know this about our group, Leon, is that we talk about stuff that, very emotional things in our group. It's about business, but it's also about personal stuff. So I would say this: when we're under stress and pressure, women go to tend and befriend, and that really serves them. Men, find people who you can, share your biggest fears, be vulnerable with them. That takes the load off your shoulders, which is good for you on the kind of self-care side. But then what you're talking about, Leon, there's such value in, talking about ideas, strategy, priorities, given all what's going on. This is why we need to be that aggressive learner again. Use your connections, your relationship to do that. So in our business, absolutely. I mean, I feel so fortunate. I've got great people in my life, including you, Leon, quite frankly, who I feel really safe with to share, but also really open to others' wisdom, to help us shape our company.
Before we head into the Q&A portion of this webcast, first, a brief note about PEO leadership from one of our members.
At PEO Leadership, I'm surrounded by other business leaders who challenge me to become better.
Les Mandelbaum, founder and CEO of Umbra.
Leaders really need to step outside their world and get new perspectives.
PEO Leadership is more than peer-to-peer advisory. It's a community of top executives with global experience.
Our retail landscape is rapidly changing. PEO Leadership has been vital in helping us navigate through this.
The time to step up and lead is now. Go to PEO-leadership.com.
Thanks, JP. We do have some questions here now popping up here. So, Myrna, do you want to come off mute and you can ask the question?
There you go. Hi, Leon. Hi, JP. This has been a great session so far, and thanks so much for sharing. It struck me when you were talking about the statistics of extraction. Those high performers seem to be able to extract more from those learning opportunities. Is there a way to train someone to extract more? If they're not that, and especially because oftentimes either A, they don't know about the causality of why that learning opportunity happened? Or do they learn the causality after they learn how to
Yeah.
extract?
Yeah. Well, it's, you know what I love about the question is that it actually points to the conundrum. It's almost like if we don't have self-awareness, how do we learn? How do we grow self-awareness? It's like something's got to go first. And I'll tell you what goes first. What wakes us up is pain. It's only when we've had a really big critical incident, a divorce, a real, challenge with a partner in a business, and on and on and on. That's what sometimes it wakes us up to say, hold on, what am I doing? So that's one piece that I would say is kind of critical, or that's part of the process. The other piece around kind of extracting more, I think it's really about, and again, I want to challenge everyone with this. We are so involved more of the time than we think in impression management. We are so afraid of how we're being viewed. And if there's one thing I could say to everyone is, like, look out for that in your behavior. If you see yourself engaging, impression management, just do everything you can to stop. Go get a coach, work on it. Because as soon as we start to get into impression management, then we don't want to show our vulnerability. Then a whole bunch of other behaviors act as barriers to that aggressive learning. So that's what I would say. It's, impression management is there, and it's a barrier. And sometimes the thing that really clears out is a real critical incident when you've gone through some real suffering and you've actually finally shared, especially let's say on the male side, with somebody else, and you're like, oh my God, it wasn't the end of the world that I shared. In fact, I feel, my shoulders feel so light now. I for 20 years, I've had a men's group that I was part of, that I organized. And honestly, we'd sit there and we wouldn't talk about the Leafs. We'd talk about the stuff, the challenges, the relationships that are not going so well. And I remember every time we'd walk out and we'd just be like, oh, you just feel so much lighter. And so this is hard though, right? Like this, I'll challenge everyone here. This is the work. To me, this is the work. You get this done, all of a sudden everything opens up. And by the way, people will love to work with you more. And let's be clear, if our businesses are going to be successful, we need our people to be fully engaged. And when people are fully engaged, they give, top people in top 10% of engagement give 25% more extra effort, discretionary effort. That's how we're going to win, right? That's how, with that trust and that engagement, great people are going to do great things, and our organizations are going to win. Even if right now in this 4 or 5 months, if you're in travel, or if you're in, our business is travel related because I fly around and speak at, conferences. That part of our business is like down 85%. So, there's parts of all of our businesses that might really be affected. That aside, which you can't control, you can control all of this other stuff. And people will go through a wall for you if you're operating in this way. Great question.
Yeah, and JP, some of the services you offer really help do that. And if I speak to PEO, there's a woman, Leslie Ferrari, who works with us. She's an advisor. I don't think she's on the call today, but over the last 2 years, she developed a program for our senior leaders, our senior leadership group. So it's not the president and CEOs of the organization. And the program involved bringing them together, just like our CEOs, on every other month, closing the door and dialoguing some real issues and opportunities. So getting to think outside of the box and to learn, because we know adult learning actually, if you can actually put yourself in real-time situations and listen to stories, solve problems, it's going to stick with you a little bit more. And she then added every other month a coaching session to give that person feedback on their learning, in their input, where they are today, where they're trying to strive to. It really actually has been a phenomenal program.
Well, let me say this, Leon. I think it's incredible that we spent so much money on, right off the list, place to work out, health club, and on and on and on and on and on. And yet we spend so little on things like getting a coach. I've had either a coach or a therapist for 17, 18 years. Best investment I've ever made, really. And I see PEO as part of that, quite frankly. But that person who you can sit there, when I have to have a tough conversation, call up my coach. And I actually script it out and we role play it. And all of a sudden I feel less anxious when I'm going into the call, the conversation with someone on my team or whoever, someone in my family. When I have to sit there and say, hey, and I can approach it with less anxiety because I've already worked on it. I've prepared. I can go in, and you said this earlier, Leon, I can go in with confidence and trust myself and trust that whatever comes at me, I'm going to be okay. Like this, I mean, people on this call have resources. Go get a coach. Seriously, get a coach.
Let's go to, okay, I don't know how to, it's S. Spinks. Are you on the call? You had a pretty good question here. Well, you have a great question here.
Hi, I am. Yes, it's Sherry Spinks. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Sherry.
Great discussion today. Thank you so much. So JP was kind of already talking about my question. It was around the impression management that you were just talking about. So I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that fine line that exists between managing and projecting optimism and modeling positive behavior. I refer to it as maintaining an attitude of positive expectancy, right? You know things are going to go wrong, but it's making sure that you are responding, not reacting accordingly. But how do you do that while maintaining authenticity, right?
Yeah.
You want to be real, and you want to have your people see you as an authentic leader. So how do you do that? Let them know that you're human and empathetic while still maintaining that positive expectancy without coming across as too rehearsed and fake?
Yeah. Sherry, it's a great question. I think that rehearsed piece is really important. So let's leave that for a minute, but that's important because at the end of the day, people are trying to sense, do I believe what you're saying? Do I believe how you're showing up? If it's too rehearsed and it doesn't seem like it's in character, you know, I shouldn't maybe get too much into politics, but I'll just say this, there was a politician in the last federal election who, it was just hard to know, were they real? Were they authentic? And that put me off, quite frankly. And so we need to be authentic and real. But I see those as like an X and Y to positive expectancy or optimism. By the way, I think that's really important. We are setting the tone with that for our businesses. You know, there's some stuff people don't need to know around, you know, I won't say cash flow, but certain things that are challenging. And for us to sit there and to kind of acknowledge, yes, things are challenging. Let's look at it honestly, but let's have a positive expectancy. That's powerful. But here's around the impression management. Here's what I would say. If you're challenged with something, I think of somebody in our organization is challenged with a teen who, you know, in their life, like one of their children. And he's been really open and honest with our senior team about what's going on. And that does nothing but open everyone's heart because everyone's dealing with something like that. And that's a great way to connect. And he's just honest about, he's worried about his team. He's feeling anxiety about it. And so I think that there's some things that we can really be vulnerable about, not have to be perfect. It could be around our home stuff or even, you know, concerns around leadership. I'll give you an example. So everyone here, I'm willing to bet, I hope, no, I know this is true, but I hope you know, the one area that you're weak in, right? There's an area that everyone is weak in on this call. To what degree have you said to your senior team, you know, I've been really thinking about my leadership style and, you know, I got some feedback on a 360 or whatever, and I'm not as good at empathy as I'd like to be. And I want to get better at it. In fact, I think it's important I get better at it, but I'm feeling I'm not sure where to start. Do you have any ideas? Do you know what that can do for folks? That's so powerful. Let me give you actually one of the things that comes from our training programs. Okay, this is a great one. Ask your people next time, right? Say, by the way, you can do this one-on-one, you can do this with a larger group. Hey everyone, I want to be a really good leader. What's one thing that I could do better? And I'd really love to have a conversation about what you think I could do, one thing better that would really have an impact on you and on the business. And just open it up and don't get defensive. Open it up. And then at the end of that conversation, I've done this both one-on-one, but also with two or three, like our senior team's 5, so with 5. At the end, I think, okay, here's the one thing, and here's the key. Then you say, okay, for the next month, can you watch me on this one thing that we've just identified? And then let's have another conversation about how well I've done on that one thing. Do you know how powerful that is as a little kind of way to be vulnerable, to be an aggressive learner, to kind of cut through impression management? Like that alone can be so powerful. So, you ask for 2 15-minute meetings. This is how we frame it, right? With one or a few people. Can I have two 15-minute meetings? What's one thing I can do better? Can you watch me for a month? And let's have another 15-minute meeting and you can give me feedback. Now, here's the interesting part. As soon as you see them in a meeting, they become a reminder for you to say, okay, I'm trying to be more empathetic. And it actually helps you. I'll tell you a really quick story, Leon, and everyone. We're coming to the end. Maybe we can't do that. Here's what I want to say. It's really important that you find your habits. I noticed that there was a question. I don't know if it was you, Sherry, but somebody said, what's my morning routine?
Yes, that was me.
Okay, so I just saw that in the chat. So again, find one that works for you. Here's what I do. And this is something we've worked on for 24 years with our athletes and who all our different clients. And we just recently put this into a podcast. So it's called The Last 8% Morning. Okay, so this used to be in written form for all of our clients. And we decided 4 months ago to make it available to the world for free. So it doesn't cost anything. It's called The Last 8% Morning. And the idea is that you wake up in the morning, as opposed to looking at this darn thing, you go for a 15 or 20-minute walk. So it's a walking practice that integrates 3 things: movement, mindfulness, and mental training exercises. So the same things that I bring to athletes, to Goldman Sachs, to the Fed Reserve, to whoever else, you'll find in this podcast. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, Friday. In fact, this Friday, we're finishing our first season, but there's 60 podcasts there. So tomorrow morning, get up and don't look at your phone. Go for a walk, 15 or 20 minutes. Put me, because it's my voice. It's my routine. I walk. So I'm literally walking, and I take you through a practice that it's a BIG structure, B-I-G. B's are you make your bed, and then you go for a walk, and you are mindful of your belly and body. That's the B's. Then we pick one of the I's each day, either idea of the day, so we can be aggressive learners around human behavior, or we talk about strengthening identity. We choose one of those every day. And then one of the G's, either gratitude or goals. And the idea is that, again, you set up your day, you set the tone, you go for a walk, you come back and you're like, okay, I know what my goals are for the day. I've built a bit of gratitude. I've actually increased my learning about human behavior, so I can show up more at my best in our most difficult moments. That's what a last 8% moment is. It our more difficult moments. So thank you, Sherry, for the question. Again, use anything, but do something where you're in charge of that first hour and that last hour of the day.
JP, that was great. And a great way to sort of sum it up. I mean, what I'm taking from you, I mean, habits are looking at your habits, being able to change your habits. You can do that at any time. And as we talked, we're in a crisis. We're probably halfway through this, maybe not even at the halfway point, but don't give up. I mean, you have possibilities here. The world, you can do tremendous things to change, to really lift your group, lift yourself up, take yourself to a whole new leadership dimension here and up the game. JP, thank you for sharing your time with us today. Thank you for those that were asking questions. Great conversation. I know we could have, you see, I was worried. I thought, okay, what are we going to talk about for 30 minutes? This could go for 3 hours. I got a whole bunch of other points here to chat with you about. JP's last 8% is fantastic, by the way. If you do get a chance to listen to it, please do. In closing today, again, thank you all for being here with us to participate. If you are interested in taking a look at some other live webcasts that we've done on the way forward, they are posted on our website at PEOleadership.com. A couple of weeks ago, I had interviewed Thane Stennard over at JP Morgan, getting his thoughts on, you've all worked really hard creating wealth. I don't want to see people lose that wealth through these times as well. So he presented some different ideas and some perspectives. But we've been doing this for months now, both leadership, some mental elements, all these different things. And we've got an incredible fall planned, but we will take the month of August off, because what we didn't talk about is on this re-energizing, everyone needs a bit of vacation here. We need to re-energize, and we need to come back full strength in September. Thank you for all being with us today. That concludes our session, and I hope to see you in the future. Take care. Thank you, JP.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.